Hey guys, tonight we slip barefoot into the warm, whispering sands along the banks of the Nile. The air is thick with the scent of lotus and blue water lilies, and the faint sound of sandals scuffing against temple stone echoes through the pre-dawn quiet. You're standing just outside a modest shrine dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of music, love, and apparently, floral bookkeeping. The petals are everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs across the limestone steps, bundled in woven reed baskets, tucked into linen pouches, even tangled in the hair of a half-asleep temple boy rubbing his eyes. You blink, trying to make sense of it. Are they about to throw a wedding? Nope. This is morning inventory, and you've stumbled into one of ancient Egypt's most quietly obsessive rituals, the daily petal count. It's not just for beauty. These flower petals are offerings, tiny botanical contracts between humans and their gods. One basket of chamomile, carefully placed before Hathor's altar, is worth a whispered prayer. 10. A song of gratitude. 100. A subtle plea that your crops don't fail and your neighbor's donkeys mysteriously stop reproducing. You know, just ancient things. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough to type, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Always love seeing how far this temple trail travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk toward the shrine, and the ground crunches faintly underfoot. Dried petals from yesterday's offerings. The smell is surprisingly strong. Jasmine and henna and rose and a sharp, sour note you can't quite place. Probably from the open bowl of dried marigolds fermenting slightly under the sun. Petals rot quickly. Here, that's why counting must begin early. Before the heat ruins the tally, a priest emerges from the temple, wrapped in fresh linen, his face painted with ochre lines and eyes rimmed in kohl so neat it could double as geometry. He's holding a palm leaf scroll and a single stalk of papyrus, with the ink still drying. That's the tally sheet. And no, it doesn't say 10 roses and a dash of mint. It uses a counting system so intricate that even modern historians keep pausing mid-sentence and muttering, "Wait, that can't be right?" You watch as the first offering is laid before the statue, 12 tightly packed red hibiscus petals in a carved alabaster bowl. The priest nods once. A young assistant records a squiggly symbol on the scroll, and then they move on to the next bundle. Here's your first surprise. The number of petals isn't arbitrary. It's symbolic. Sometimes mathematical, sometimes astrological. Historians still argue whether each number had a fixed meaning or if it depended on the temple, the festival, or the mood of the scribe who got up too early that day. One theory: 12 petals represent the 12 stages of the sun's journey across the sky. Another theory: they just liked even numbers. Also, offerings don't have to be from wealthy families. In fact, some of the most common contributors are farmers and artisans who show up with bundles of whatever's blooming along their irrigation ditches. Petal offerings are the most democratized part of temple ritual. Everyone can pluck a daisy. But there's a catch. Every offering must be counted by at least 2 people. Why? Because apparently, divine math requires double-checking. You look to the side and notice a second scribe, much younger, less kohl, and far grumpier, muttering and pointing at the first priest's notes. They're disagreeing about whether something's a petal or a leafy fragment, and suddenly, what looked like a serene spiritual offering turns into what can only be described as ancient Excel drama. Is that a petal or a part of the stem? It's the edge of a petal. It's rigid. Feels like stem. Touch it again, and you'll count the whole bundle by yourself. You blink slowly. Somewhere behind them, a cat is napping on a step, twitching its tail like it's heard this argument 1,000 times, which it probably has. A temple acolyte shuffles by with a bowl of lavender sprigs. He's 12, possibly high on sun exposure, and drops the bowl, lavender everywhere. Nobody moves for a full 5 seconds. Then, without a word, the senior scribe sighs deeply and reaches for a clean scroll. You know this moment. It's the "our spreadsheet just crashed" moment, ancient version. You move closer to the altar, now dusted in petals like powdered sugar. The statue of Hathor sits in shadow, eyes serene, head crowned with a sun disk. Her face is unfazed by the chaos below, and maybe that's the point. These petals aren't for the gods to admire, they're part of a process, a transaction. They remind the worshippers that attention to detail, patience, and repetition are divine acts, one flower at a time. One count, one breath. And here's your first quirky gem. There are recorded instances of priests refusing entire bundles if they believe the petals have been handled by someone impure, which, loosely translated, meant someone who argued with their neighbor too loudly that week. Petals carry gossip. Apparently, you sit on a low stone ledge, the heat beginning to creep into the stone beneath you. The counting continues, and slowly, the mood shifts. Less arguing, more rhythm. 2 petals, ink mark. 3 petals, sigh, a silent nod. Then a joke. Then a sneeze. Petal dust floats in the air like powder on a chalkboard. You realize this isn't just a ceremony, it's a shift, a morning routine, a divine coffee break. And as you yawn, don't worry. So do the priests. You realize something else. These ancient rituals aren't strange. They're familiar. They're quiet, fussy, occasionally frustrating moments of human order clinging to divine chaos. You lean back. The counting continues. The day warms, and you haven't even seen the sniffer yet. The counting is still going when the sniffer arrives. You notice him instantly, not because he's loud or grand, but because everyone subtly steps aside like he's walking around with a very sensitive nose and a very short fuse, which, to be fair, he is. This is the temple's official floral inspector. A title that sounds poetic until you realize it mostly involves crouching beside baskets of wilting petals and muttering things like, "This smells like mildew and rebellion." He doesn't wear much to distinguish himself. Simple linen wrap, wide-brimmed reed hat, and a pouch of beeswax he smears under his nose now and then. A kind of olfactory reset button, one petal at a time. He leans in, breathes slowly, sniffs like he's trying to detect sarcasm, then nods or doesn't. You watch him pause over a bowl of blue lotus petals, lift one up like it's a suspect caught in a lie, and press it to his face. His nose wrinkles. Too damp. This one was harvested after sunrise, he says, voice flat, bored, but final. The offering is rejected. The scribe sighs and scratches it off the tally. It's hard to know what's more absurd, that a flower is being denied divine passage because it's got morning dew on it, or that the scribe already had a line ready to cross out. Either way, it's serious business. Petal purity, they believe, affects spiritual signal strength, like trying to tune in your Wi-Fi, but all your blossoms are soggy. Good luck reaching the afterlife. Historians still argue whether this sniff test had any real theological basis, or if it was just temple politics giving certain officials more power over the ritual than others. Some scholars believe it was a class issue. Elite petals from palace gardens were almost never rejected, while peasant bundles got the full nasal interrogation. The sniffer moves on, leaving a subtle trail of beeswax and judgment. You trail behind him, watching as he crouches beside a pile of marigolds. He sniffs once, sneezes, then waves it through. Apparently, that was a blessed sneeze, or maybe he's just tired. Behind him, the senior scribe is now marking each approved bowl with a dab of red ochre, just a single dot near the rim. It's their version of a divine QR code. No dot, no go. Then things get interesting. A man appears near the steps, clutching a reed basket swaddled in linen. You know this type. Nervous, shifty eyes. Clearly hasn't slept. He edges closer to the altar, waiting to present his offering. The priests nod, and he gently peels back the linen. An enormous pile of fragrant, pale pink petals rose. You think, but finer, more perfumed, too perfumed. The sniffer doesn't even bend down. He inhales once from where he stands, then raises an eyebrow. "You added oil?" he says flatly. The man blinks, freezes. "You soak them in rose oil," the priest says again, louder this time. Gasps from multiple directions. The scribe turns slowly in his seat. Another priest, younger, steps forward and pokes the petals with his reed stylus. It comes up shiny. There's a moment of silence. And then, laughter, not from the priests, from the temple boys on the side. One of them shouts, "Cheaters' petals." Apparently, this happens more than it should. People sweetening their offerings with extra scent in hopes of divine favor. The problem, scent is considered a message, An added smell sends a signal the gods didn't ask for. It's like scribbling forgive me at the bottom of a sacred scroll. And here's your fringe detail of the evening. One old inscription refers to these over-perfumed petals as whisper-stained, meaning they carried human intent too clearly. Like shouting at the gods through a bouquet, the basket is rejected. The man slinks off. A cat sneezes behind you, as if to underline the moment. But even in rejection, the process continues. You notice that offerings are often grouped, roses in one row, jasmine in another, wild herbs bundled together. There's a rhythm here, a kind of logic that feels both meticulous and completely chaotic. Then comes a hiccup. The senior scribe suddenly stops writing. He lifts his stylus, frowns, and flips through several palm leaf pages like someone who's just realized he skipped step 7 in a 14-step spell. He calls the other scribe over. They whisper furiously, and then both of them turn to the sniffer, the count from last moon's waning. One of them says, "Might have omitted the saffron bowls." The sniffer just stares at them. "You swear." For a moment, he looks personally offended. Saffron, by the way, is insanely rare. Petal offerings from saffron crocus are reserved for festivals or death rites. Forgetting them in this logbook is like misplacing a gold statue. The mood tightens. You suddenly feel like you're watching an ancient version of a corporate audit, only with a lot more incense. Eventually, the sniffer gives a reluctant nod. Redo the totals. Begin from the west altar. You barely suppress a sigh. So do the priests. Here's your fun fact for this section. Archaeologists once found a set of tally sticks buried beneath a temple floor, each one notched with numbers and lightly dusted in dried pollen. Literal backup records, just in case the scrolls were lost. That's how seriously they took their floral maths. And now, here you are, back at the start of the row, watching a priest rub his temples like he's reliving the worst group project of his life. But there's beauty in the absurdity. There's something strangely touching about people taking flower petals so seriously. You're witnessing a civilization that believed even the softest things, petals, scent, silence deserved rules. And you begin to wonder, what happens when two priests disagree on a count? What if one says, "That's 56," and the other swears it's 7? Well, you're about to find out. You're still seated on the warm stone ledge when the argument begins. It starts quietly. Just two priests hunched over a shallow clay dish, whispering and pointing. But within moments, voices rise like the morning sun. One priest gestures furiously, tapping his stylus against the rim of the bowl. The other just holds up his fingers, flashing them like a street magician revealing a trick. You inch closer, eavesdropping in the most respectful, ancient Egyptian way possible by pretending to rearrange your sandals. The dispute: a miscount. One claims 56 petals were laid in the offering bowl. The other insists 57. You might think, what's one petal? But here, a single petal could mean the difference between a general blessing and a very specific one. Like, "Please let my goats bear twins this year." Historians still argue whether this obsessive precision was truly for the gods or if it was for the scribes themselves, locked in a lifelong feud over numerical pride. To resolve the standoff, a third priest is summoned. Enter the nose. Again, you recognize him immediately. Same beeswax, same scowl. Apparently, scent plays a role in the count too if a petal has already wilted. Its fragrance fades, and it's no longer considered alive enough to qualify. So now you're watching three grown men sniffing a bowl of slightly dried petals while muttering phrases like, "This one's barely breathing," and you counted that twice. It's conjoined. You try not to laugh. You fail internally. And here comes your odd little fringe tidbit. Some temples recorded separate counts for petals that were alive, fading, and symbolic. Symbolic petals, it turns out, were sometimes carved from wax or dried reeds, included when the real thing was scarce, especially during droughts or flower blights. Eventually, they settle on a compromise: 56 and a half. Yes, halved. Apparently, one of the petals had split down the middle. And instead of discarding it or gluing it, which is not a thing, they decided it counted as 5. You don't even have time to process that before the next bizarre detail slides into view. From the back of the temple emerges a priest carrying a round, shallow tray. He places it on a stone pedestal just outside the main chamber. This, you learn, is the scent table where high offering petals are judged not just for number or shape, but for how they blend. Think ancient perfumery meets ritual geometry. The priest begins arranging the petals into a precise spiral pattern. Darker petals on the outside, lighter ones toward the center. It's beautiful, hypnotic. Even, you watch as bees hover nearby, lured in by the natural perfume, only to be gently waved away by a boy with a feather fan. Apparently, if the scent spiral smells unbalanced, too sharp, too sweet, not enough middle notes, it can throw off the whole offering. One priest leans down to sniff the arrangement. He pauses, frowns, then rearranges 2 petals with slow, meditative precision. It's like watching someone adjust violin strings by smell. This is where your mainstream historical fact comes in. Ancient Egyptian temples really did employ smellers, priests, or assistants trained to detect and interpret the symbolic weight of scents. Some were blindfolded during training to sharpen their senses. They were part scientist, part oracle, part bloodhound. And here's where you get philosophical. The Egyptian idea of ka, or the life force, wasn't just tied to breath or food, it was tied to scent. Fragrance was considered one of the few things that could cross between the physical and spiritual worlds without translation, which is why rotting petals were considered dangerous. They didn't just smell bad, they could confuse the gods. You glance around and notice a priest holding a small clay jar, pouring powdered myrrh over one of the bowls, not to mask a bad smell, but to bless the scent's transition as it rises in the heat. And it is getting hotter. The sun has crept up above the palm trees, and the temple stones are beginning to radiate warmth like a slow oven. Petals start to curl in their bowls. The scent thickens, becomes cloying. A boy runs by with a bowl of fresh water and sprinkles each offering gently like misting produce at a grocery store. Only, this is for eternal judgment. You shift your weight, watching a petal droop visibly before your eyes, and you can almost hear the debate it will trigger. Does it still count if it wilts after the tally but before the placement? Historians still argue that 1, 2, you're lulled into a semi-trance by the rhythm of it all. The counting, the sniffing, the scribes murmuring numbers. Occasionally, a low hum of chanting ripples through the temple air, barely louder than the rustle of linen robes and bees. It's strange, isn't it? This much fuss over flowers, but you're beginning to understand. It's not the petals themselves, it's what they stand for. Ephemeral beauty, human effort, the illusion of order in a world where sandstorms can erase an entire farm overnight. Counting petals is a way to push back against chaos, one fragrant, fluttery unit at a time. A breeze drifts in from the river, stirring some of the offering bowls. A single petal lifts, twirls lazily in the air, and lands near your foot. You don't touch it. You're not sure if it's sacred, rejected, symbolic, or cursed. Best not to get involved. Instead, you stretch out your legs, lean back against the warm wall, and close your eyes for just a moment. The scent spiral spins slowly behind your eyelids, and the count goes on. You're jolted gently by the sound of something wooden snapping. It's not a dramatic snap, more like a quiet crack, followed by the slow, breathless silence of people realizing something went wrong in a place where things are supposed to be perfect. You open your eyes. The junior scribe has broken his stylus. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to you, but here, it's the equivalent of your laptop crashing during a tax audit. Ink splatters down his palm. He stares at it. A bead of sweat rolls down his cheek. Not from the heat, but from sheer panic. He wasn't just recording counts, he was drafting the official temple petal log for the lunar cycle. And that broken stylus, it means the last 15 entries might have to be redone. From memory, you watch as the senior scribe slowly closes his eyes. His nostrils flare. No one speaks. Even the bees freeze mid-hover. Then, very quietly, the elder reaches beneath his seat and produces a small wax tablet flat, rectangular, coated in a thin layer of dark resin. He hands it over like a first aid kit, and just like that, you're about to witness a forgotten bit of petal protocol. Wax backup notation. The younger scribe pulls a bronze stylus from his belt blunt-ended, made for pressing rather than writing, and begins to carve each number into the soft wax with the delicacy of someone tracing prayers into wet clay. It's a temporary measure, but it's a lifesaver. You glance around and spot 3 more of these wax tablets tucked beneath the altar cloth emergency ledgers, kept warm and pliable in the shade. They're engraved with counts, categories, even corrections. Apparently, mistakes happen often enough that the gods have grown used to revisions. Historians still argue whether these wax notes were meant to be erased later or preserved forever. Some even believe they were ritually melted once the true count was transcribed into the official scrolls burned in incense bowls so the numbers could rise to the gods. Now, here's your fringe fact. Some wax tablets recovered from temple sites show ghost traces of multiple layers of writing, meaning the priests may have used the same tablet for months, scraping it smooth each night like a chalkboard of eternity. As the scribe scratches out the lost entries, a group of priests near the far wall begins preparing for the afternoon audit. Yes, audit. Turns out, once the petal offerings are placed and counted, someone else comes around to verify that the numbers in the scrolls match what's in the storage bowls. That person is usually a temple auditor, a role invented entirely to prevent petal fraud. You raise an eyebrow. Petal fraud. Oh yes, apparently, some overzealous priests, especially during festival weeks, have been known to pad the offerings. Not for personal gain, mind you, but to make their temple look holier than others. If one shrine presents 800 petals to Isis, and your shrine only manages 320, it's bad optics. Divine jealousy is real. Babe. So, the auditor arrives in the most suspicious of ways, quiet, bare feet, no greetings. He wears no jewelry, no colored linen, just dull beige, and a small pouch of dried reeds used for measuring depth in the offering bowls. He doesn't speak, just observes. You follow him as subtly as possible as he circles each offering, dips the measuring reeds into the bowls, counts residue lines, and cross-references the wax tablet. If there's a mismatch, too few petals, too many. He marks the bowl with a small smudge of black ink on the outer rim. 3 bowls is in, and there's a problem. One of the offering bowls supposedly contained 75 petals, but the current count, minus wilted fragments, sits closer to 60. The auditor's nostrils twitch. You brace for drama. Instead, he calls over the junior scribe and asks a single, sleepy-sounding question. Did you count stems? The boy turns pale. Apparently, one of the priests had been bundling small flowers with full stems to look fuller, and someone counted them as petals. The bowl is quietly disqualified. You'd expect a scandal. Instead, there's only weary acceptance. One priest mutters, "Next time, strip the greens." The auditor moves on. And here's where things get weirdly personal. You learn that the auditor himself keeps a private ledger, one not shared with the temple. It's believed this was a form of accountability not for the gods, but for the next auditor. Think ancient Yelp reviews. Petal counts accurate, wax record clean, but priest 4 whispers his numbers. Suze, you can't help but marvel at this system. Petals, scent, stylus snaps, secret audits. It's bureaucracy wrapped in blossom-scented ritual. And here comes your mainstream fact. Large temples in ancient Egypt were massive economic centers. They tracked grain, taxes, livestock, and yes, flowers. Offerings were part of that larger machinery, which means yes, there were real consequences if your temple's numbers didn't line up. But still, a flower is a flower. It withers, fades, disappears into dust. So you wonder, how did they make sure people didn't just lie? That's when you spot it. A humble, unassuming clay jar by the steps. Inside, dried petals, tagged, sealed, and stored like archival relics, a kind of sacred inventory vault. You learn that once the count was done and the offering displayed, a handful of petals from each bowl was preserved in a dry clay capsule marked with that day's date and moon phase. Proof, just in case a future priest wanted to question today's honesty. And suddenly you get it. This isn't just faith, this is accountability in petal form. As the sun rises higher and the scent thickens again, rose, Basil, sweat. You lean back into the warm stone and whisper to yourself, petal fraud. Who would have thought? And just then, you hear a shout from the far end of the courtyard. Washerwomen are arriving, with petals from the laundry. Oh, it gets better. The washerwomen arrive like a sudden breeze, laughing, bickering, balancing reed baskets on their hips, and carrying the sweet, sharp smell of crushed hibiscus and soapwort. You sit up, curious, because these women are definitely not priests. They're loud, barefoot, hair tied with bits of string. One of them wipes her nose with her elbow and immediately tucks a frayed towel under her arm, like it's nothing. And yet, their baskets are overflowing with flower petals, not fresh ones, not arranged. These are damp, wrinkled, faintly foamy. You watch as one of the older women, her hands red and pruny, walks up to the offering station like she owns it. She plunks her basket down beside the stone pedestal, nods to the junior scribe, and says plainly, from the rinse water, 27 jasmine, 8 marigold, 1 mystery flower I don't want to questions about. You blink. Wait, laundry petals. That's a thing, apparently. Yes, the laundry pools used to wash temple linens, ceremonial garments, and sacred veils often caught petals that had clung to clothing during rituals. Rather than discard them, the washerwomen began collecting these leftover blessings and offering them in their own name, kind of like spiritual recycling. The priests had mixed feelings at first. Some temples accepted these petals as low-tier offerings. Others rejected them entirely, claiming anything washed in soap lost its divine vibration. Historians still argue whether this practice was officially sanctioned or just quietly tolerated because, well, who wants to offend the people who wash your robes? But here's your delightful fringe detail. One old priestly record refers to these offerings as waterborne blooms and notes that they carry humility, if not fragrance, which is a poetic way of saying they're wrinkled, but they mean well. You lean forward as the scribe counts the contents. He hesitates over one soggy petal that looks more like a piece of lettuce. The washerwoman shrugs. It smelled nice yesterday, she says, unapologetic. He writes, "In were one in the margin," and moves on. Another woman steps up, this one younger and clearly new. She presents a bundle of minty-smelling petals wrapped in linen. The scribe accepts it, but the scent sniffer, oh yes, he's back, wanders over, sniffs once, and says flatly, "These are from yesterday's bathhouse, not temple linens." Cue the silence. The young woman freezes. One of the older women hisses, "I told you to sort them." Apparently, there's a strict boundary. Petals clinging to ceremonial linen. Acceptable. Petals from someone's hair after a steam soak. Spiritual contamination. One carries devotion. The other carries gossip and sandal sweat. The entire basket is rejected, but kindly. One of the older washerwomen places a hand on the girl's shoulder and says, "Next time, watch the steam petals. They're tricksters." You blink. Trickster petals. You start to realize just how rich the language around these offerings has become. Over time, even ordinary workers, those with no official role in the temple, have developed an entire unwritten lexicon about what makes a petal worthy. There's the first pluck bloom freshly opened at dawn, still holding dew, very desirable. There's the sun-spoiled edge, a crispy petal that curled before harvest, dangerous if too many are offered at once. And then, of course, the ghost petal, a flower you swear was there, but somehow disappeared from the basket. Some say the gods take them early as a sign of approval. Others blame the temple cats. You chuckle to yourself. One of the older washerwomen approaches you, clearly amused by your curiosity. She pulls a single petal from behind her ear, a soft, pale pink geranium, presses it into your palm, and whispers, "That one's for listening." You hold it, uncertain. Is this a blessing? A joke? A test? She walks away before you can ask. Back near the altar, the priests are now logging the accepted laundry blooms into a separate scroll. This one is smaller, simpler, and made from papyrus that's clearly seen better days. But it exists, which means, officially or not, these offerings count. And now comes your mainstream historical fact. Temples often kept distinct ledgers for classes of offerings: grains, oils, wine, linens, and yes, even second-hand flower material. It's part of what made their bureaucratic structure so astonishing. Nothing was wasted. Everything was labeled somewhere in Memphis or Thebes. There was probably a dusty shelf labeled "Petals Submerged," non-festival. The sun is inching higher, and the courtyard is starting to bake. A priest rings a small bronze bell, signaling the end of the informal morning offerings. The washerwomen gather their empty baskets and begin to leave laughing, smacking each other with damp towels, flicking stray petals from their skirts. One stops to pour out a bowl of gray water behind a fig tree. A cat laps it up, tail flicking lazily. And here comes the quietest, most beautiful moment of your day so far. As the last washerwoman steps through the temple gate, she turns, tosses a handful of leftover petals into the air, and lets them fall wherever they land. No bowl, no count, no scroll, just petals, carried on the breeze. The junior scribe stares at them. He opens his ledger, pauses. Then, very quietly, he writes, "Unclaimed blooms. 7. Eastward drift." You exhale, because even the petals no one asked for, those carried on wind or dropped by mistake, matter here. And next, you'll see how the temple sorts these blooms by color, weight, and complaints. You return to the ledge just in time to see a group of temple apprentices unroll a wide, color-stained mat across the courtyard floor. It's woven from faded linen and looks like it's been through more flower drama than a royal wedding. Upon it, they begin pouring small piles of petals, one handful at a time. Like kids counting Halloween candy after a successful loot, each pile is sorted by color. Reds to the right, yellows in the middle, whites in a perfect ring. Around a stone bowl filled with water symbolically pure and used for purification rites, blues are laid on a raised platform and counted twice. Because, of course, blue petals are rare, high-ranking, and somehow always missing a few by the time they reach the altar. You sit cross-legged, watching as one of the younger boys squints at a faintly purple petal and mutters, "Is this blue or confused?" His friend, without looking up, replies, "It's lavender," which means someone's trying to pass off cheap as sacred. You're now in the middle of the temple's unofficial complaints department. See, not all petals are treated equally, and not all priests agree on what counts as red. One older boy insists that sunset orange falls under the red category. Another says it's clearly part of the citrus tones. You want to jump in and ask if they've considered just calling it orange? But honestly, you're not ready for that kind of theological fallout. Here's the historical nugget for this stretch. Ancient Egyptian color classification wasn't purely visual, it was also symbolic. Red could mean life or danger. White signified purity, but also grief. Blue represented rebirth and the Nile. And since the gods were believed to see symbols, not just shades, sorting petals by color was a sacred act of communication. Each group of petals gets its own tally, noted in dry papyrus ledgers with colored twine bookmarks. A priest walks by and ties a green cord around the blue petal page, which is either a categorization system or someone's way of saying, "Don't mess with this." And now your fringe detail. Some temples supposedly believed certain petal colors whispered different things to the gods, that red could be used to express anger, yellow for flirtation. Yes, divine flirting was a thing, and white for apology. There's even one preserved tablet that warns against offering too much red to a calm deity, lest the gods wake stirred and irritated. You're watching the world's most delicate emotional color code system. The wind picks up, and several petals tumble out of their piles. Two apprentices scramble after them, shouting, "Don't let the reds mix with the yellows," like they're guarding national secrets. And now, oh yes, comes the complaints scroll. One apprentice fetches it from beneath a shaded awning, and it's thicker than you'd expect. Turns out, temple complaints weren't always about major scandals. Many of them were about, you guessed it, petals. People really cared about their offerings being recorded correctly. The scribe flips the scroll open to today's date and reads aloud. From Baket Mut, daughter of Sia, I place 6 sunset marigolds, not 5. Please adjust before sunrise tomorrow, or I'll be back with my mother. You almost laugh. Divine threat by matriarch. Another entry reads, from the priests of the North Gate. We have observed that our lotus bowls are consistently placed too near the incense burners, which wilts the outer petals prematurely. Kindly consider repositioning. And here's the kicker. The priests take these complaints seriously. They draft responses, sometimes even perform minor purification rituals to correct an accidental oversight. One temple assistant sighs and says, "We had to recount yesterday's entire lavender offering because someone whispered. It looked faded." You lean over to watch the sorting more closely. A petal is held up, scrutinized, and quietly tossed aside, too dry. Someone says, "Another. This one has a bug bite." Another, "This one feels sad." "Wait, what?" You ask one of the older apprentices, only half joking, if petals can actually feel things. He shrugs. "The gods know. We don't judge. But if it feels wrong, we set it aside." And this is where the whole system begins to feel less like an audit and more like a ritualized empathy machine. Each petal is treated like a tiny soul, carrying the intentions, anxieties, and whispered wishes of someone who couldn't afford gold or perfume, just a bloom from their garden. You notice a small woven basket near the wall, filled with discarded petals, not thrown out, just set aside. The label on it reads, "Offerings unready." You ask what happens to those. They get re-offered. Someone says, "On quiet days, when the gods are listening gently." You sit back, stunned by the tenderness of it all. The precision, the rules, the chaos, but always, always, there's room for softness. And just when you think things can't get any more precious, a temple cat jumps into the red pile. Utter bedlam. Petals scatter. One boy shrieks like his soul left his body. The scribe starts laughing uncontrollably. And the cat, of course, does that arrogant thing cats do, licks its paw and pretends it didn't just commit spiritual vandalism. The petal piles are ruined. For now, but no one's angry. They just begin again. Because in this world, even chaos has a place, even miscounted petals carry weight, even cats are forgiven. And soon, you'll step outside the temple gates, into the market, where petal taxation is very real and surprisingly aggressive. You step out through the rear gate of the temple and into a street that smells like yesterday's cumin, this morning's fish, and somehow last week's figs. But beneath it all, you catch a familiar trace. Roses, wilted, dust dusted, and carried by the breeze like gossip. The market is already full, vendors shouting, goats snorting, palm frond baskets creaking as they sway in donkey carts. You wander past rows of clay jars and date cakes, looking for something very specific. You've heard whispers about it. Now you want to see it with your own eyes. The petal tax counter. Yes, it's real. It's not a building. Exactly. More like a covered stall, guarded by two sleepy-looking officials in striped kilts. Between them sits a set of copper scales, a basket of calibration stones, and what looks suspiciously like a pile of confiscated flowers. You edge closer. A merchant, young, sweaty, nervous, approaches the table, holding a bundle of wrapped petals in one hand and a slightly flattened onion in the other. "Roses," he says, trying to sound casual. The taxman lifts the bundle, sniffs, snorts, "3 dirts," he says. "Pay with either 2 onions or half a duck egg." The merchant grumbles, but hands over the onion. His petals are weighed, inspected, marked with a smear of ochre, and placed in a clay jar labeled "Verified Offerings. Civilian Source." Yes, babe, you heard that right. Civilian flower offerings get taxed. See, in ancient Egypt, temples weren't just spiritual hubs. They were bureaucratic machines, and petals, though lightweight, were trackable property, especially during festivals when flower prices surged like avocados in winter. If you brought a bundle of petals into town whether to sell, donate, or offer, you had to declare them. Historians still argue whether this practice was strictly enforced or just another way to monitor temple donations and maintain ritual fairness. Some records suggest that only certain flowers were taxed. Others hint that local priests used it to settle petty feuds. "Oh, you brought lilies again? Horemheb. How generous. That'll be 2 onions. Here's your quirky fringe detail. One surviving merchant's tablet from Thebes includes a rant about taxes on blossoms lighter than a child's breath. The tablet ends with a doodle of a very grumpy flower. Honestly, same. You linger near the stall, watching the next petitioner. A woman with sunburned shoulders and a huge bundle of blue cornflowers. That gets everyone's attention. Blue petals, high tier, used in rebirth rites, rare, precious. The taxmen straighten their backs. One of them pulls out a fresh sheet of papyrus. She smiles sweetly. It's for my aunt. She's getting her tomb cleaned. Translation: this is a spiritual errand, less taxable. One taxman narrows his eyes. Is your aunt alive? No, she says, too quickly. The other frowns. Then you'll need the burial exemption scroll. She groans, digs through her basket, and produces a wrinkled palm slip stamped in blue wax. He inspects it like it's a counterfeit bill, nods reluctantly, then waves her through. You follow her at a distance, watching as she slips her bundle into a shaded temple gate labeled "Dead Petals Only." Another world. But before you drift too far, the taxmen catch sight of you. One waves lazily. Got any blooms on you? You pat your robes. Nope. Unless they want to tax the sleep in your eyes. He grins. Then keep moving, or help sort the unclaimed stash. He gestures to a crate behind the booth. Overflow petals, either left behind, confiscated, or unclaimed by merchants too poor to pay. These are known as drift offerings. Communal petals that eventually make their way to public altars. And now you get your mainstream fact. Many temples had public donation points where anyone regardless of class could contribute petals anonymously. These were often pooled, blessed, and offered en masse during moon festivals. But here's the fun bit. Some temples got competitive about who had the most colorful public pile, which led to floral inflation. You peek into the crate. It's a mess of colors, textures, and maybe one or two flowers that definitely started as herbs. A little girl runs up with a tiny fistful of petals and drops them in with care, then dashes off without a word. You watch the petals settle into place. Somewhere behind you, a taxman is arguing over whether saffron petals should be weighed wet or dry. And in that moment, the absurdity and beauty of it all hits you again. Petals, whisper thin, weightless things, measured, counted, fined, argued over like they're stocks on the market floor. You leave the tax stall, drifting toward the riverbank, where flower barges are said to arrive before the festival. But before you reach the shore, a street performer calls out, "Petal prophecies, 1 coin per fate. Only the brave and the broken." You chuckle, tempted, but you've got something better waiting downstream. You're about to see how flowers travel in bulk by boat, by basket, by divine confusion. And spoiler, no one ever agrees on who gets to count what. When the barge sways, you follow the scent before you even hear the boats. It's a slow, lazy pull: roses, lotus, chamomile, and that sweet, buttery tang of saffron. It carries down the slope toward the Nile docks like gossip rolling downhill. And then you see them. The petal barges, wide-bellied reed boats swaying gently at the mooring posts, each one stacked with baskets brimming to the edges with blooms. Some are tied with blue ribbon festival deliveries. Others wear no tags, just scrawled chalk marks along the planks. Southern Temple, sunrise tally. Keep dry. Do not count yet. Seriously, you stand at the edge of the stone dock, where 3 priests, 2 scribes, and 1 very overwhelmed boy are trying to coordinate the offloading ceremony, which looks less like a sacred process and more like an aggressive game of divine flower Tetris. The first basket lands with a soft thump. Pink petals spill out in little puffs like they're trying to escape inventory. The scribe grabs a charcoal stylus and starts noting down symbols on his clay tablet. And then the barge sways, just a little, enough to tip one of the baskets. Petals cascade everywhere. Some float, some sink. One lands directly on the forehead of the youngest scribe, who without looking up mutters, "This doesn't count. I swear to Ra, it doesn't count." You bite your lip to keep from laughing. The issue, you quickly learn, is this: nobody can agree on when to start counting. Some priests say the offering becomes official the moment it touches temple ground. Others insist it's when it leaves the boat. A third group, particularly the dock scribes, argue that mid-air counts are valid, especially for divine bloom arrangements that must never touch common stone. Historians still debate which method was considered canonical. Some temple manuals describe 3 separate counts: departure count, arrival count, and ceremonial count, and no 2 numbers ever match. Here's your fringe fact for the day. One priest's diary from a Nile-side temple includes a furious note: "Today's lotus count is a lie. Boat priest counted by handfuls, not petals, shall file complaint with Horus in dream." So yes, even dreams got dragged into petal math disputes. Back on the dock, the The priests form a chain. Each basket is passed from boat to dock to temple cart, and at every handoff, someone mutters the current count aloud. 32, 32, 32, until one apprentice says 33. Everything stops, all heads turn. A beat of silence. The boat priest looks skyward, as if begging for divine patience. The scribe sets down his stylus with the weary grace of a man who's restarted a scroll too many times this week. And the boy, the one who said 33. He looks like he wants us to jump into the river and live among crocodiles. Where did you see 33? The senior priest asks, tone velvet smooth and lethal. The boy points to the bottom of the basket. I think one petal was stuck to another. Then it was one, the priest says. Petal clusters count as one if inseparable. And that's your mainstream fact for today. Ancient Egyptian inventory practices were surprisingly nuanced, especially in temples. If 2 grains of wheat were stuck together by honey or sweat, 1 unit. If a petal was damaged but whole, still 1. But if it crumbled mid-transport, it became partial tribute, often recorded separately. They had a whole vocabulary for these micro-events. Bloom split, finger press loss, wind lofted escape. All logged, all argued over. You hear someone call out numbers again. The rhythm resumes. A white lotus rare. Sacred is handed off with extra care. Everyone holds their breath until it lands safely in the priest's palm. He nods, gently places it into a shallow bowl lined with linen, and says, add 1 to the soul count. Soul count. You learn this is a separate ledger, a symbolic tally not for material petals, but for the intention behind each offering. Soul petals are added when the flower is unusually vibrant, perfectly shaped, or occasionally arrives accompanied by a prayer whispered by a child or elder. These aren't always announced. Some are just felt. You glance at the scribes. One of them is writing 2 numbers beside each entry, physical and spiritual, 1 for what was sent, 1 for what was meant. You sit near the end of the dock, watching the last few baskets come ashore. A priest examines a bundle of yellow marigolds and raises his eyebrows. Boat 4. He asks. The scribe nods. The priest sighs. Always boat 4. Their marigolds smell like goat, and here's your favorite detail yet. Some temples would blacklist barges for repeated flower quality violations. There's even a recorded instance of a captain being ordered to wash his entire boat with milk and fig water after 3 consecutive stale bloom deliveries. As the sun creeps higher, the scent of mingled petals intensifies. The dock smells like a dream dipped in citrus and sweat. A priest passes you carrying a bowl of freshly sorted blue cornflowers, whispering a chant you don't understand. And just as you feel the pull of sleep behind your eyes, a donkey brays from uphill, pulling a cart piled with color-coded ledgers. Of course, because after the petals come the scrolls. You're not done counting yet. The cart creaks down the slope, wheels wobbling like they're personally offended by the weight they're carrying. You watch as it rolls to a stop beneath the shade of a sycamore fig tree, one of the sacred kinds. The donkey immediately starts chewing on a rope. That is definitely not food. No one stops him. Everyone's busy staring at the scroll bundles. They're massive, thick rolls of linen and papyrus, each dyed slightly to indicate category. Yellow for daily offerings, red for festival counts, green for probable duplicates, and white for weight petals given to the dead. You follow 2 junior scribes as they lift a white-wrapped scroll from the pile and carry it carefully, reverently, through a narrow archway that leads into the necropolis side of the temple. It's quieter here. The breeze feels different, cooler. It carries less rose, more dust. You smell sandalwood, dried herbs, and faint myrrh undertones of tombs, silence, and prayers meant for the long haul. Ahead of you, rows of tomb markers, carved limestone stelae, half buried in sand, decorated with lotus engravings and half-faded names. This is where the petal offerings for the dead are brought. And the ritual here, it's even stranger. You watch a priest kneel beside a tomb and gently scatter 7 white lilies in a fan shape. He whispers something too soft to catch, then nods to the scribe, who jots down a symbol that looks like a bird nested in a circle. You ask what it means. Bird for spirit, the scribe says without looking up. Circle for return. 7 lilies for memory. You blink. So, you're counting the petals and the symbolism. He finally looks up and grins. Like you've just asked whether rain is wet. Of course, you don't just give flowers to the dead, you give the right ones. And this is where it gets layered. See, offering petals to the dead wasn't about making the tomb smell nice. It was a form of spiritual bookkeeping, a way of ensuring that the deceased received not just food and incense, but fresh memory. One flower, one memory, or one visit, or one day closer to rebirth, depending on which priest you ask. Historians still argue over whether these offerings were meant to nourish the K life force, guide the Bay soul, or just politely remind the gods, hey, don't forget this one. She liked cornflowers. You follow a group of mourners, 3 sisters, an elderly uncle, and a quiet child, each carrying a satchel of dried petals. They move from tomb to tomb, depositing small handfuls with practiced grace. At one grave, they lay only 3 petals. At another, over 50. You notice that they speak the names of the dead aloud with every offering. The names float softly into the dry air, curling around the stems like threads in a breeze. And here's your fringe gem. Some families would store extra petals in clay pods sealed with wax, then break them open days or weeks later for delayed offerings. These were called memory bursts, like setting a divine calendar reminder. Offer 3 petals when the moon wanes, or open on the feast day of tears. You glance up the path and spot a group of temple boys kneeling in a circle, counting petals aloud. But they're not offering them, they're playing with them. You wander closer. One boy tosses a petal in the air. If it lands upright, she loves you. Another throws his petals like dice. 2 reds and a white. You'll be a donkey merchant. The rest erupt in laughter. These are petal counting games, part prayer, part prediction, part mischief. They've been passed down through temple apprentices for generations. Think of them like sacred fortune cookies that smell better. The most popular game, petal hexing. You chant a person's name under your breath, then blow a petal across the sand. If it lands near a shadow, curse. If it lands near a flower, forgiveness. Do these kids believe it? You can't tell, but they whisper the names anyway. And then, as the sun begins to dip and shadows lengthen between the tombs, a final ritual begins. A procession of priests emerges from the temple gate, each holding a small dish of mixed petals, one red, one yellow, one blue, one white. They move slowly through the necropolis, placing one petal at every unmarked grave. No names, no scrolls, no counts, just color, just memory, just scent. You feel it in your chest, the quietness of it, the reverence, the math that doesn't ask to be perfect, just present. As the last petal drops, a breeze rises, lifting the scent back toward the temple, and tomorrow it'll begin again. But tonight, you walk back with the last of the scribes, beneath a sky that smells faintly of lilies and old stories. And soon, you'll return to the temple gates just in time for the children's rhymes and curse-counting rituals under the moon. The moon is up now, round, yellow, slightly smug, and the temple courtyard glows like it's been brushed with diluted silver. You drift back through the main gate just as the air begins to cool. The stone is still warm beneath your feet, but the scent has shifted. Less jasmine, more dust, less ceremony, more childhood. That's because the temple boys and girls are still awake, scattered across the steps, their hands stained with petal pigments. They're whispering and giggling their way through the most important event of the night. Curse-counting games. You ease down onto a bench and pretend to stare at the moon, but your ears are locked in. Say the name. One girl whispers. Another leans in. I can't. What if it works? It won't unless you believe. Just say it. Then drop the petal. A third child sighs. Dramatically. Fine. Horemheb. The petal is dropped. It flutters down, lands awkwardly half-folded near a crack in the stone. A sharp inhale. That's bad. That's crack landing. You're about to ask what that means, but one of the temple boys answers before you can open your mouth. Crack means secret. The gods heard, but won't tell you what they'll do. Oh, that's comforting. These aren't official rites. No priests are supervising, but the kids take it dead seriously. They've created a whole language of signs and omens where petals land, what shape they take, whether they twirl or fall flat. It's not approved. It's not banned. It's just known. Your historical fact here. Ancient Egyptian children often received early religious instruction through games. chants, and rhyme puzzles. Some scholars even argue that the roots of certain temple codes began as playful chants refined over time into full-blown theology. You listen as one child sings softly while counting dried lotus petals into a clay bowl. 1 for the moon, 2 for the flood, 3 for the eye that watches the blood. Then she pauses and frowns. I forget the rest. 4 is the worm. A boy whispers, helpfully. They nod in unison. They drop the 4th petal. You suppress a shiver. And here's your fringe delight. There exists an old limestone wall in a ruined village school that bears the etched remains of a children's petal chant. Scholars call it the whisper game. It includes phrases like, never count petals by the door in the god of crumbs. Here's lies in color. No one knows what it means. That doesn't stop them from taking it very seriously. Back in the courtyard, the kids begin trading petals, bargaining like tiny merchants in the world's gentlest black market. I'll give you 2 pinks for 1 blue, only if it still smells. You licked it. That's cheating. A boy tries to convince the others that a shriveled marigold is actually a spirit-blessed amber bloom. He's promptly pelted with spent petals until he recants. One girl older, solemn, sits apart. She doesn't play. Instead, she places a petal on each of her fingers and slowly presses them into the stone, one by one. You ask what she's doing. Marking days, she says, 1 for each sunset until the next festival. When I finish the circle, I get to make a real offering. She's got 22 to go. You sit beside her for a while, letting the rhythm of her ritual lull you. Press, count, whisper, press again. And then one child breaks the peace. Petal thief. Someone shrieks, dramatic as a sandstorm. All heads turn. One boy is holding way too many reds, clearly beyond reasonable childhood accumulation. He runs. 3 kids chase him, laughing, shrieking. A cat joins the pursuit for no reason. No one's really angry. It's part of the game. But there are rules, because even among children, petal counts matter, even pretend ones. A younger boy walks past you, holding a single violet blossom. He stops, stares up at the moon, and says, if I give this now, will she dream of me? You blink. Who? He grins. The girl with the honey voice. I heard her sing behind the priest's hall, but she didn't see me. Then, solemn as anything, he walks to the altar steps, places the petal carefully beside a crack in the stone, and walks away. You don't say anything. There are moments where the whole weight of civilization, belief, childhood, and longing is held in a single movement. That was one, and maybe the gods notice too. A breeze stirs, not strong, just enough to lift the petal into the air. It twirls, drifts, lands in the exact spot where the counting bowl was this morning. No one saw it, except you. But you have a feeling it was counted. Tomorrow, this courtyard will fill again scribes, priests, washerwomen, petal sniffers. But tonight, it belongs to the children, to their games, their tiny curses, their impossible hopes. You rise slowly, and ahead, in the temple's oldest chamber, waits a stone calendar. One where each day isn't a date, but a blossom. And it's time to see how the petals mark time. You step softly into the cool hush of the temple's inner sanctum, where the ceiling is so high it disappears into shadow, and the air smells like old ink, sandstone, and just the faintest trace of lavender long turned to dust. It takes your eyes a moment to adjust. Then you see it. On the far wall, half hidden by a curtain of reed matting, is the calendar. Not a grid, not a circle, not even a wheel. It's a wall-length relief chiseled stone and inlaid lapis and faded pigment. Dozens of petal shapes, each one distinct, some round and soft like lotus, others long, pointed like saffron or hibiscus. Each petal is paired with symbols, moons, waves, serpents, open palms, fire, and beneath each, a count. 1, 2, 9, 30. You found it. The calendar of 360 blossoms. Every temple had its own way of marking sacred time. But this is something more obsessive. A system where each day of the 360-day Egyptian civil calendar was represented by a single sacred petal, its color, scent, and ritual use encoded into the calendar itself. Petals weren't just offerings here, they were time. You step closer, tracing a fingertip just above the carved outline of a tulip-shaped bloom marked Day 42, East Wind Blessing. A priest notices your curiosity and smiles as he walks past. Smells bitter in summer, he murmurs, but lucky in childbirth. Sure, of course it does. A scribe sits cross-legged before the wall, copying petal marks onto a fresh palm leaf scroll. You peek over his shoulder. Each entry includes not just the day's flower, but the weather, mood of the priests, and whether anyone argued over the count. Yes, petal calendars include emotional footnotes. Here's your mainstream fact for the section. The ancient Egyptian civil year had 12 30-day months, plus 5 epagomenal days at the end. Most religious calendars used festivals, moon phases, or agricultural signs to track time. This temple, however, used a floral calendar that aligned both offering cycles and seasonal rituals. It was probably beautiful. It was probably chaotic. It was absolutely complicated. You move along the wall. Day 108, jasmine at noon. Day 173, red bloom beside morning stone. Day 301, blue petal. If found, you laugh softly at that last one. And then you reach something different, a blank petal. No carving, no symbol. Just an empty space, shaped like a flower but left smooth. You glance at the priest nearby. What happened here? He frowns, thoughtful. That's the forgotten day. A story says a storm washed the petals away before they could be counted. Another says the offering was stolen. Some believe it's just a day for silence. Historians still argue over whether these blank petals were mistakes, metaphors, or deliberately left open so each generation could interpret them anew. Some say the gods required a day where nothing was asked, no offerings, no counts, just presence. You like that theory. On a nearby ledge sits a small petal clock, an absurd but very real device made of thin reeds and hollowed-out stone rings. It's not a clock in the ticking sense. Instead, petals are placed into each ring at sunrise, and their rate of wilting determines the passage of the temple day. One priest picks up a half-wilted calendula bloom from the fourth ring and mutters, "Lunch hour." A second priest replies, "Only if it's not windy." Yes. Precision meets poetry again. Here's your fringe tidbit. A few fragments of petal clocks have been recovered in burial tombs, suggesting that timekeeping by flower decay may have accompanied the dead, helping them measure their steps through the afterlife. You kneel beside the wall, staring at day 222. It's shaped like a rosebud, closed, carved with extreme care. No fragrance indicated, no ritual specified, just one word below it. Wait! A petal for patience. You glance back at the scribe, who is now drawing an elaborate border around day 343, Festival of the Sky Mouth. Apparently, it requires lavender, mint, one child's laughter, and a bowl of still water. You don't ask. You just smile, because that's how this whole thing works. Each day is a bloom. Each bloom is a message. Each message is guessed at, debated, sung about, rewritten, forgotten, remembered again. You finally rise, and your knees crack like a papyrus scroll. The priest beside you laughs. Time gets heavy, he says. You nod, walking backward out of the chamber, eyes still fixed on the wall. And somewhere behind you, someone rings a small bell. It's the end of the offering hour. Outside, a breeze picks up. You'll want to get back to the courtyard quickly because the rains are coming. And with them, petal panic. The first raindrop doesn't even make a sound when it lands. It just appears on the dusty stone like a question mark. Then another, then 10 more. A whisper of a drizzle, thin and teasing, barely wetting the air, but the panic it triggers in the courtyard, immediate. You watch the shift like a tide. A priest looks up, eyes wide. A scribe stumbles, clutching his scrolls to his chest like they're infants. One of the petal counters lets out a full-body groan. No, not again. Not on inventory day. Welcome to the flower flood crisis. Turns out, rain is the natural enemy of the petal count. Not because it ruins the scrolls, those are protected. Not because it makes the priests late, these guys have sandals for every terrain. No, rain is the problem because it does the unthinkable. It makes petals stick to the ground. You don't realize how big a deal that is until you see 3 apprentices sprinting out with scooping fans. Giant woven paddles designed not for fanning but for lifting wet petals without tearing them. Another priest rushes by carrying something wrapped in linen and shouting, "Where's the counting umbrella?" Oh, yes, that's real. A young assistant races back and holding what appears to be a giant leaf-covered frame mounted on poles, basically a sacred tarp. They unfold it above the main altar platform like it's shielding royalty. Beneath it, petals, dozens, all mid-tally, raindrops spatter against the leaves, echoing like tiny drums. Everyone flinches with each one. You watch as the chief scribe flips open a rain ledger, a separate record used only during unusual weather events. Each page begins with the same header: Sky Interruption, Offering Fate, Pending. Here's your mainstream fact. Many Egyptian temples kept parallel scrolls for events affected by floods, storms, or eclipses. These scrolls weren't considered invalid, just differently sacred. Anything counted under sky disturbance had to be reoffered, reviewed, or watched overnight before it could be accepted. Historians still argue whether this was theological caution or just a divine loophole for redo counts. And your fringe gem. Some temples recorded sky moods alongside the offering data. If a sudden breeze knocked over a petal bowl, it wasn't a clumsy apprentice. It was the god of gusts expressing a preference. Notes like Ra impatient, Isis distracted, or Hathor maybe teasing weren't uncommon. Meanwhile, the temple kids have gone feral. They've taken the rain as a sign from the gods to abandon structure entirely. You hear squeals from the west courtyard as they begin tossing petals into puddles, trying to see whose bloom floats longest. One boy yells, "Red floats better than yellow. It's because it's bolder." Another counters, "It's because yellow wants to leave." A tiny girl in soaked linen walks by, dragging a basket and humming a song you don't recognize. She stops, picks up a soggy petal from the mud, holds it in both hands, and says, "This one's too tired to count. It just wants to sleep." Honestly, same. You retreat beneath an awning as the rain becomes a real curtain. Light but steady, the stone glistens. Petal trails turn into mushy streaks. Color bleeds into the cracks like someone spilled paint across time. The scribe starts sorting what's been water damaged. Petals that are soaked but still hold their shape go into one pile, viable if dried. The ones that tore in half, symbolic remnants. The ones stomped under a sandal, a shrug, gone to the underworld. You ask one of the priests what happens if the entire day's offering is ruined. He sighs. "We wait until the moon changes and re-offer, or we offer in silence, or we blame Sobek and move on." Sobek, god of chaos and crocodiles. Classic. Just then, a boy runs in holding a ceramic dish over his head. Inside, a single intact lotus petal, floating gently in an inch of rainwater. Saved it. He beams. A priest kneels, peers inside, nods solemnly. That one counts, because it chose to stay dry. And yes, that becomes a footnote in the ledger. Petals. Petal survived rain in child's hands. Considered chosen. The absurdity is stunning. The poetry even more so. This whole system so exact, so breathless, so anxious is trying to maintain precision in the face of weather. And yet, when the rain comes, the petals decide, not the priests, not the numbers, not the scrolls, just the petals. And somehow, everyone accepts it. By dusk, the rain slows. The clouds hang low and sulky. The temple smells damp and oversteeped, like tea left too long on the fire. The courtyard is littered with what the scribes call petal ghosts. Faint stains where once red blooms dissolved into the stone. You see one apprentice dragging a reed brush to mark each spot. "For reference," he says, "so we don't double offer tomorrow." You glance up at the sky. No stars yet. Just streaks of purple light stretched thin across the evening. And in the middle of the courtyard, a cat sits exactly where the largest offering bowl once stood, licking its paw, as if it owns the place. You smile, because the count may be ruined. The scrolls soaked, the tally paused. But the rhythm, it always continues. Tomorrow will bring fresh petals, fresh counts, fresh arguments. But tonight, you'll step into the sanctuary's shadows where a quiet debate is brewing. Because after all this, some priests aren't sure the gods even like petals. You step into a smaller side chamber lit by 2 flickering oil lamps, and something much stranger, silence. It's the sanctuary of second thoughts, not its official name, of course. But you can tell right away this room feels different, not just quiet, but hesitant. The walls are carved with faint outlines of gods you recognize and some you don't, all with half-finished inscriptions. Symbols trail off mid-prayer, a lotus left unpainted, a cartouche with no name, and in the center, a low table. Around it, 5 senior priests, 2 scribes, and a bowl of petals no one seems to be counting. Instead, they're talking, not chanting, not reciting, debating, softly, carefully. One leans forward. We speak of numbers, of scent, of color. But do we truly know what they want? Another rubs his temple. The gods. No, says the first. The petals. A third priest chuckles dryly. Are you suggesting the petals are the ones offering us? You've just walked in on the great petal doubt. Apparently, once every month or so, the senior priests gather here to air their theological frustrations, off the record, in low voices, because even in a world built on ritual, repetition, and rigor, doubt blooms. And the question on tonight's docket, did the gods ever ask for petals? The oldest priest, whose voice sounds like papyrus being unrolled too fast, speaks without lifting his eyes. The scrolls mention flower offerings, but the earliest carvings, those in the old delta stones, they speak of grain, of milk, of light. A younger one, clearly nervous, says, "But we've always offered petals, have we?" The old one replies. "Or did we start because they're easy to carry and hard to steal?" You love this. You sit at the edge of the room, pretending to adjust your sandals so you can soak in every word. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Floral offerings didn't appear prominently in temple inscriptions until the Middle Kingdom. Before that, animal sacrifices, bread, and beer were the dominant forms of devotion. Petals only rose in status when temple economies shifted towards symbolic and aesthetic gifts over material ones. And your fringe theory. Some scholars argue petals became central not because of divine preference, but because they wilt, because they disappear, because they leave no trace, the perfect offering visible, fragrant, counted, and then gone. Like a breath, the second scribe dares to speak. But what of the scent? Doesn't scent carry upward? Don't the gods breathe it in? A pause. Then the youngest priest nods slowly. Yes, but if they breathe, do they also choke? Everyone stares at him. He shifts uncomfortably. I mean, what if we've been overwhelming them? What if too many petals have made the heavens heavy? There's a beat of stunned silence. Then, the oldest priest, yes, the papyrus-voiced one, chuckles. Deep and dusty. So now the gods are holding their breath because we've been too generous. And still, no one dismisses it. Because this is the room where nothing gets dismissed. You notice a scroll lying nearby. Unrolled halfway, it's a petal. Retraction record. A list of offerings that were withdrawn after being deemed theologically uncertain. One line reads, 8th of Paopi, 43 lotus petals retracted. Belief was muddled, intention unclear. Reoffered during flood season. This, apparently, is a regular occurrence. Here's the thing. They don't recount the petals. They uncount them. They subtract them from the scrolls like a spiritual refund. Then they reframe the ritual around clarity. A priest sighs. Sometimes I wonder if they'd prefer silence, or wind, or laughter. Another replies, we could offer those things, but petals are easy to see, easy to weigh, easy to control. And now you're at the heart of it. Control, that's what counting does. It gives humans the illusion that they're in sync with gods who are famously difficult to schedule. You glance at the bowl in the center of the table. The petals are dry, slightly curled, their color faded. No one dares to touch them. Because in this room, the most sacred thing is the question, did they ever want this? Do they still? Or have we been measuring devotion with the wrong ruler? And now your favorite absurd detail of the night. One priest once recorded in his private scroll that he dreamed of a god who plucked every petal from every offering and threw them back into the Nile. Laughing. When he asked why, the god replied, I never needed flowers, I needed honesty. No one's been able to agree on what that meant. You rise slowly, leaving the priests to their muttering, their charts, their sacred uncertainty. The doorway is still warm from the day's sun, but the night air has settled, and outside, the The final offering of the season is about to begin, because after weeks of counting, sorting, debating, sniffing, and wondering, the last bloom of the year waits to be laid. The night wraps around the temple like a silken shroud, cool, dense, and humming with stillness. No wind, no laughter, not even the cats are moving. You step barefoot into the main courtyard, where the last oil lamps flicker low, casting long shadows that dance like tired scribes finally stretching their backs. In the center of the courtyard, a single offering bowl waits. Polished alabaster, perfectly round, empty, not for long. Tonight marks the end of the Petal year, the 360th day. Tomorrow begins the 5 sacred bonus days epigomenal, unpredictable, dangerous. But tonight is for the final bloom. You join the small crowd already gathered: priests, scribes, apprentices, washerwomen, tax counters, even that one boy who tried to hex someone with a marigold last week. No one speaks, not out of command, but respect. A hush has weight when it's earned. At the temple steps, the petal keeper emerges. She's older than time, or at least looks it. Her back bowed, not from age, but from decades of deliberate, reverent posture. She wears white linen, carries no scroll, and walks barefoot. In her hands, a covered reed basket. Inside, the last petal, just one. Not a bundle, not a bouquet, not a rainbow swirl, just a single bloom, plucked before dawn, stored in still water, kept from sun, wind, touch, and thought. She kneels beside the bowl and waits, not for ceremony, for silence. Only once the temple has gone completely still, no breath, no cough, not even a whisper of linen on stone, does she lift the basket lid. You lean forward, holding your own breath. It's a blue lotus, full, luminous, perfect. The kind of flower that makes you believe the gods must have fingerprints. She lifts it, carries it to the bowl, and lays it gently in the center. A ripple of scent bursts out, cool, sweet, ancient, not perfume. Memory. No one claps, no one chants, but everyone watches as the petals float outward in slow, circular grace. The bowl accepts the flower like it was always meant to be there. And just like that, the year ends. You feel it. A soft shift in the air. Not dramatic, just complete. Here's your mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians believed the year was made whole only after the final ritual was performed, often tied to the heliacal rising of Sirius or to seasonal floods. Some temples chose symbolic acts to mark this moment, and in this one, it's always been a single blue lotus, always one, never two. And the fringe detail, there are whispers, just whispers, that the gods reject the final petal every 19 years. That on that year, it sinks, vanishes, leaves the bowl empty. When asked what to do if that happens, a scroll simply reads, "Wait for morning, then begin again." Tonight, though, the lotus floats. You notice the youngest apprentice slowly inching forward with a wax tablet, ready to record the time, the condition of the petal, the exact temperature of the stone. But the petal keeper lifts one hand. "No count," she whispers. "It has already been counted." And in that moment, everything becomes clear. The dozens of scrolls, the petal clocks, the color debates, the scribes panic over stem fragments. It was never about perfection. It was about presence. The act of paying attention to something as fragile and fleeting as a flower, of naming it, weighing it, questioning it, offering it up anyway. You glance around. Some priests are weeping, silently, openly. One apprentice drops to his knees and just breathes, and someone behind you murmurs, "We made it, all 360. You smile, then notice the scribe, the same one from the first morning, sitting beside the bowl, legs crossed, stylus, resting in his lap. He doesn't write. He just stares at the bloom until he leans forward and very quietly says, "Beautiful little liar." You tilt your head. He sees you watching, shrugs, and whispers, "It wilted hours ago. We chilled the water, dabbed its edges with honey, pressed the color back with berry dye." He smiles, not guilty, not proud, just aware. "It's not real," he says. But the gods never asked for real. They asked for faithful. You sit down beside him. You look at the lotus again, and for a second, it does seem perfect. Not fresh, not fake, just willing. It showed up, even if someone helped it do so. And maybe that's enough. maybe it always has been. And as the night deepens and the temple begins to exhale, you'll stay a little longer in the scent of closing chapters. Tomorrow, there will be 5 wild days of uncounted time. 5 days where no petal rules apply. But not yet. Tonight belongs to the final bloom and the last count that doesn't need to be counted. The temple breathes differently now. It's the kind of stillness that follows a deep exhale. When all the counting is done and even the scribes give up trying to find something else to log, no more scrolls are unrolled. No reeds are sharpened. The styluses lie flat, like they have earned a nap. You step carefully around the final offering bowl, where the blue lotus still floats barely. Its outer petals have begun to soften, curl slightly at the edges, just enough to remind everyone that time, no matter how sacred, wilts. You wander, not out of purpose, but out of habit, through the side corridor where the sniffers wash their hands with basil water, past the pile of discarded laundry blooms from earlier in the week, now being ground into powder for incense, around the pillar, where someone, probably a bored apprentice, has etched a crude doodle of a cat eating a daisy. The temple is folding into its own quiet, and the final scrolls are being sealed. In a back room lined with clay shelves, 2 senior scribes roll their ledgers one last time. You peek inside. Each scroll is marked with a tiny smear of pigment, 1 petal color per cycle: yellow, blue, red, white, then tied with twine and gently tapped on the end, as if to knock any lingering spirits out before shelving. One scribe sighs, brushing his thumb along the rim of a wax tablet. "We counted everything," he mutters. His partner doesn't look up. "That's what you think." A final joke, low and soft. The kind that tells you they've been doing this for decades, that they'll do it again next year, that they'll never finish counting. Not really, because here's the truth. They all know. The petals don't stop, even when the scrolls close, even when the years end. There's always another bloom, another whisper, another hand placing something soft and scented on stone, hoping it means something. You step into the outer courtyard again, now slick with moonlight and the residue of rain. A small group of temple children has returned barefoot, half asleep, carrying little bundles of petals gathered from the garden edges. Not for offering, just for fun. One boy waves you over and holds out a blossom. You want to do one last count? You smile. He places the flower in your hand. It's crooked, crumpled, probably stolen from a priest's windowsill, and perfect. You turn it slowly between your fingers, then whisper, "1." The boy nods solemnly. "One's enough." He runs off, and you don't follow. You sit on warm stone in the night breeze, listening to the gods, or maybe just the cats, move gently through the shadows. You think about everything you've seen. Scribes counting stems, priests sniffing petals like detectives, washerwomen sneaking marigolds from rinse buckets, kids hexing their crushes under the moon, petals offered to the dead, and petals doubted entirely. The final bloom, perfect but painted. And you realize it wasn't about the petals, it was about the people who touched them, who sorted them, lost them, prayed with them, lied for them, sang to them, counted them like they could control the stars. You lean back, and now it's time to rest. Let your limbs soften. Let your thoughts dissolve like the scent of yesterday's jasmine. Let the stone beneath you cradle what's left of the day. And if you listen carefully past the rustling reeds, past the whisper of a cat leaping somewhere unseen, you might hear it, the sound of the last petal falling, soft, uncounted, but not unnoticed. So now, just let the night carry you. No more numbers, no more ledgers, no more arguing over whether that one slightly damp petal counts as 2. You've walked through the temple. You've watched the children chant their sleepy curses. You've seen petals sorted, weighed, forgotten, doubted, and offered again anyway. And it was always enough. Because there's something deeply human in this need to measure what fades, to name what drifts, to try, even just a little, to organize the softness of life into scrolls and spirals and bowls made of stone. But not everything has to be counted. Some things are meant to float, to wither, to disappear and still matter. Like that blue lotus painted, preserved, imperfect, still sacred, So now, close your eyes. Feel the weight of your own day settle gently beside you, like a petal placed with intention, not to impress the gods, not to be tallied in a scroll, just to say, I was here. Breathe in slowly, as if you're catching the last hint of jasmine on a breeze that's already halfway gone. Let your thoughts fall quiet, like petals dropping one by one into still water. And when you finally drift, let it be soft, like a gift you didn't know you offered, like a flower that doesn't need to bloom again to be remembered. Sweet dreams.